Hi foodies, tonight's dinner is Cracker Barrel Meatloaf. I worked at Cracker Barrel for like a week and that's when I discovered this, and we found a dupe and JR made it, and ever since then this has been his recipe to make. He made this so good, I kept begging him to make it more. Now, I was never a big meatloaf fan prior to this. That's probably because I grew up in the 70s when they kept throwing that Lipton onion soup mix in there, and then it was always really dense and overcooked and dry, and they'd throw some, congealed gravy over it. I couldn't stand it. And my youngest daughter really doesn't like meatloaf at all. In fact, she says she hates it, but she took a bite of this and she's like, meh, it's okay. So for somebody who hates meatloaf, she gave it like kind of a half thumbs up, and I'm telling you, this is putting the crack in the Cracker Barrel meatloaf. I don't like using that adjective though to describe food. I don't think we should start normalizing that word as being something that describes something good and delicious, but it's kind of applicable to here. Despite the controversy behind the Cracker Barrel logo and everything, we're not here for that. We're just here for the meatloaf. So JR's on KP duty, but he's my guest chef. And we're doing that because I put my yogurt in the Instant Pot and totally forgot we had the mashed potatoes, so we're doing it old school. So we're starting out with some diced green pepper and onion. You can also use celery and carrot if you want. Ritz crackers, we're going to use a sleeve and a half. We're going to shred some cheddar cheese, any sharpness you desire. I like extra. Some eggs, brown sugar, ketchup, and mustard for the topping. Very simple topping. Some milk for a little moisture addition, and there's my yogurt. It has nothing to do with this recipe though, don't you worry about that. And here's the food processor, because I think I've told you guys before, they add chemicals and preservatives for shredded cheese, already pre-shredded, and it's more expensive. This way it's cheaper, it's melts better, and it doesn't have all that other stuff in it. So now we've got our potatoes all ready to go, and we've got our oven preheated to 350. 2 pounds of hamburger meat are awaiting their fate to turn into a masterpiece of loaf. So JR is going to take over. Oh, but I want to tell you guys about this. I'm using a Central Street seasoning from the Spice House based out of Evanston, Illinois, which is where I grew up. My very first apartment at 18 years old was on this street. So of course I had to try it, and it's perfect in this. But you can add, as you can see, paprika, celery salt, onion salt, garlic salt. You can add whatever spices you like. Just don't add that Lipton soup mix to your meatloaf anymore, people. We have evolved. This is 2021. But you can order it online through the Spice House. Spices Inc. is another favorite of mine, and Penzies. This is in no way sponsored by any of them. I just like ordering my stuff online because it really is a better deal, higher quality. Although there are some grocery store spices I still do really like too. So it's just an endless variety of spices to be found online. And you can also buy in bulk if you're so inclined. So we have shredded up the cheese. Whatever we don't use, we can freeze, put in the fridge. Now he ground up these crackers with his bare hands because he's a man. But you can use a food processor or stick it in a baggie and use a mallet, like a meat tenderizer, and pulverize them however you want. Now he's adding the veggies there. And again, you can add a little bit of celery or carrot. You won't really taste it, but it adds a little bit of nutritional value. Now he's adding the salt and pepper if you want to feed it to the kiddies who don't maybe like veggies. If you don't like veggies and you omit it, you're going to miss out. But that's the Central Street seasoning. But again, you can use some paprika, some garlic and onion powder, whatever might, tickle your fancy on this. And now he adds a little bit more cheese than the recipe calls for. He puts in about a cup. I think the recipe is only about maybe a third of a cup, but we like a little extra cheesy, and it does not affect the texture of the meatloaf at all. So I would say if you're a cheesehead like we are, absolutely go for it. Now he's mixing the meat. I'm really proud of him because he's not like a raw meat type of a person. He doesn't like touching it, but he does really well with this. Of course, he washed his hands first, but you do not want to over mix your meat. This is true for meatloaf, meatballs, any type of ground beef. even hamburgers, they will become too dense and too dry. So you just want to mix enough to incorporate the ingredients that you're using, but you don't have to. It's not like you're making a loaf of bread. You don't have to knead it. So now he's adding in the milk and the 3 eggs. 3 eggs might seem like a lot, but it acts as a binder, but it also does act as a moisturizer, and it adds a richness to it, but it doesn't taste eggy by any means, so don't be scared. And now he's just going to incorporate the wet ingredients in there as well. So you really got to go with the Ritz crackers on this. This is what makes it the Cracker Barrel. So now we're putting it into loaf. Again, you don't want to pat this down or pack it too tightly for the same reasons as you don't want to overmix your meat. We're doing 1 loaf for our meal, and then the other one because he wants to have meatloaf sandwiches as leftovers. So I think that was me saying don't pack it down too tightly. Some people will say leave some room at the edge, but the meat shrinks, so you really shouldn't have to worry about that. So now we're going to bake it uncovered, meaning no foil and no sauce, for the 30 minutes. And then after the 30 minutes, or while that's happening, now he's going to make the topping, which is simply tomato sauce, ketchup, mustard, and brown sugar. And that's it. Now Hunt's makes a really good meatloaf sauce in a can. It's actually called Hunt's meatloaf sauce. It is a tomato sauce based. Look at how cute he is. He should be on the Food Network. But this is emulating the Cracker Barrel one, which is kind of tangy and sweet. The Hunt's one is more kind of a tomato saucy with the green pepper and onion in it. So now after 30 minutes, he's going to remove the loaves to add the topping. Adding the topping at this point will seal in the brownness that has already occurred. So it got a nice little crust on the top, but not so much to the point where it's like having burnt ends. It's not going to be too, I don't like that when the sauce is pretty much burnt on top of your meatloaf. So what this does is this will prevent the meat from over browning. So you don't need to add foil. You wouldn't want to do that anyway because the foil just gives you like this gray loaf. It's not good. And because we're only going to be baking this for another 30-40 minutes, this sauce doesn't have time to caramelize and get burnt either. So it'll thicken up a little bit, but it won't get weird like some meatloafs that I've had, and they try to cover that up by throwing, like I said, that coagulated brown gravy over it. Ugh, yeah, I can see why people hate meatloaf, but honestly, you will not hate meatloaf if you try this. You will want this all the time. Now we're putting it back. He's putting it back in. I keep saying we because we're such a team, but he's putting it back in for another 30-40 minutes. Check your meat thermometer. I'm turning on the water underneath the potatoes. By the time the meatloaf's done, the potatoes should be ready to mash, and we're also getting our broccoli together to steam. This is our classic traditional meatloaf dinner. I'm using Boursin cheese in my mashed potatoes, but my normal secret is I use Philadelphia whipped cream cheese, the chive and onion, and again butter, a little splash of milk, salt and pepper, and there it is. Oh, it's so good. We didn't know it was going to be 85 degrees today when we planned this video out, but who cares? Comfort food, it still works. It's moist, it's still dense, it's not completely falling apart, but it's not so dense that it's like a brick, and it won't sit like a brick in your belly. It makes fabulous leftovers. It freezes great. You guys must try this. It is absolute the best meatloaf ever, and of course JR makes it the best too.